Zekthar stood at attention in the great hall of the Vorthek command ship, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he waited for his orders. The massive chamber hummed with the energy of 1,000 warriors, all eager to hear about their next conquest. The air smelled of metal and victory, the same scent that had followed the Vorthek Empire across dozens of worlds. High Commander Velenith stepped forward, his crimson armor gleaming under the harsh lights. His voice boomed across the assembled troops, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. Warriors of the Third Fleet, today we receive our greatest honor. The High Council has chosen us to claim a new world for the Empire. Zekthar felt his heart race with excitement. After 15 cycles of service, he had proven himself in battles across the galaxy. His plasma rifle had cut down enemies on frozen moons and burning desert worlds. His tactical skills had earned him the respect of his peers and the attention of his superiors. This new assignment could be the stepping stone to his own command. The target is a small planet called Earth, Velenith continued, activating a holographic display that showed a blue and green world orbiting a yellow star. Intelligence reports indicate a primitive species called humans. They have barely mastered space travel and still use crude kinetic weapons. Their technology is centuries behind our own. The commander gestured to the display, showing images of human cities and military installations. Zekthar studied the data with professional interest. The humans appeared to be divided into multiple factions, each with its own military force. Their weapons were simple projectile devices, nothing compared to the advanced plasma technology of the Vorthek. Their space vessels looked clumsy and slow, built for cargo rather than combat. These creatures are soft, Velenith said with obvious disdain. They allow emotion to cloud their judgment. They waste resources caring for their weak and injured. They have no understanding of true warfare or the strength that comes from unity under a single banner. Zekthar nodded along with his fellow warriors. The briefing made sense based on everything he knew about inferior species. The humans seemed to lack the basic survival instincts that made the Vorthek such effective conquerors. They were scattered, weak, and unprepared for the reality of interstellar conflict. Admiral Korthax joined the briefing, his presence commanding immediate silence. The Admiral was a legend among the Vorthek, having conquered more worlds than any other commander in recent history. His tactical genius had broken the resistance of dozens of species, each one learning too late that defying the Empire was futile. The humans have no orbital defenses, Korthax explained, his voice calm and confident. No unified command structure. No experience with weapons beyond their primitive firearms. Intelligence suggests they will surrender within days once they understand the futility of resistance. The Admiral activated another section of the display, showing Earth's major population centers. We will position our fleet above their primary cities and demand surrender. When they refuse, as primitive species always do, we will demonstrate our power by destroying a single military installation. This should be sufficient to convince them of the wisdom of submission. Zekthar felt a slight disappointment creeping into his excitement. The mission sounded more like a diplomatic exercise than a proper battle. Where was the honor in crushing an enemy that could barely fight back? Where was the glory in defeating a species that had never faced a real military threat? I know some of you hope for a more challenging assignment, Velenith said, as if reading Zekthar's thoughts. But remember that easy victories serve the Empire just as well as difficult ones. Every world we claim without significant losses is a world that can be put to productive use immediately. The commander was right, of course. The Empire's strength came from its ability to expand efficiently, adding new resources and populations to fuel further expansion. A quick victory over Earth would provide valuable mining rights and a large population of workers to serve the Empire's needs. As the briefing continued, Zekthar learned more about the human species. They were apparently obsessed with individual freedom, a weakness that prevented them from achieving true unity. Their governments changed regularly through a process called elections, creating instability and conflicting policies. They even allowed their civilians to own weapons, a practice that struck every Vorthak warrior as completely insane. The humans will likely attempt to negotiate, Korthax warned. They seem to believe that all conflicts can be resolved through discussion rather than strength. Do not be fooled by their words. They will say anything to avoid facing the consequences of their weakness. The fleet began its journey toward Earth the next day. Zekthar spent the long weeks of travel studying the intelligence reports and preparing his equipment. The plasma rifle felt familiar in his hands, its weight and balance as comfortable as his own scales. His armor had been polished to a mirror shine. Each plate fitted perfectly to his body as Earth grew larger in the viewport. Zekthar found himself looking forward to the mission despite its apparent simplicity. Perhaps the humans would surprise him with some unexpected resistance. Perhaps their primitive weapons would prove more effective than intelligence suggested. Perhaps this would be more than just another routine conquest. The blue and green world filled the screen, beautiful and peaceful in its ignorance of what was coming. Soon, Zekthar thought, it would be another jewel in the Empire's crown, its resources flowing back to feed the war machine that had brought the Vorthak to dominance across the galaxy. He had no idea that within days, everything he believed about warfare, about strength, and about the nature of true courage would be shattered forever. The Vorthak fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their massive ships casting shadows across Earth's surface as they positioned themselves above the planet's major cities. Zekthar watched from his battle station as the command ship took position over a sprawling metropolis the humans called New York. The city stretched for miles in every direction, its tall buildings gleaming in the sunlight like crystal formations. Admiral Korthax stood on the bridge with his arms crossed, studying the tactical displays with satisfaction. The humans had detected their arrival, of course, but their response seemed confused and disorganized. Radio chatter filled the communication channels as the various human governments tried to coordinate their response to the unexpected visitors. Open communication channels to all major population centers, Korthax ordered. It is time to make our intentions clear. The Admiral's image appeared on screens across the planet as he delivered the Empire's ultimatum. His voice was calm and measured, speaking in the broken human language that intelligence had provided. People of Earth, you are now subjects of the Vorthak Empire. Your governments have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your civilization. Zekthar expected immediate panic. Every other species they had encountered had responded to such demonstrations with chaos and terror. Governments had fallen within hours as populations demanded surrender rather than face annihilation. But the humans seemed different somehow. Instead of collapsing into fear, the human governments began coordinating their response with surprising efficiency. Within minutes of the Admiral's broadcast, military bases across the planet buzzed with activity. Fighter aircraft that had been grounded for maintenance suddenly roared to life. Naval fleets that had been scattered across the oceans began converging on strategic positions. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Threx, "we are receiving a unified response from the human leadership. They appear to have elected a single spokesman." The main screen flickered to life, showing a middle-aged human in a dark suit standing behind a wooden podium. His face was lined with age and stress, but his eyes held a determination that surprised Zekthar. This was President Carter, the leader of one of Earth's most powerful nations. "I speak for all of humanity," Carter began, his voice steady despite the obvious fear in his expression. "We have received your demands and we reject them completely. Earth is our home, and we will not surrender it to any force, no matter how powerful." Zekthar felt a chill run down his spine. This was not the response intelligence had predicted. The human leader should have been begging for mercy, not delivering defiant speeches. "We know you have superior weapons," Carter continued. "We know you have destroyed other worlds before ours. But we also know that freedom is worth more than life itself. If you want our planet, you will have to take it from us." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Admiral Korthaxis' face darkened with anger. Foolish creatures. They have no idea what they are inviting upon themselves. But Zekthar was watching the tactical displays with growing unease. The humans were not behaving like a defeated species. Their military formations were moving with purpose and coordination. Their communication networks were functioning perfectly despite the presence of an overwhelming enemy force. More disturbing was the response from the civilian population. Instead of fleeing in terror, they were organizing evacuation procedures with mechanical efficiency. Children were being moved to underground shelters while adults formed supply lines and communication networks. The humans were not just preparing to fight. They were preparing to survive. "Sir," reported Sensor Operator Vex, "we are detecting massive troop movements across the planet. The humans are mobilizing their entire military force." Korthax studied the reports with growing irritation. Impossible. No species has ever coordinated a planetary defense this quickly. They should be in chaos by now. Zekthar watched as human fighter squadrons formed into attack formations that seemed far more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested. Their aircraft moved with precision and discipline, each pilot maintaining perfect position. Despite the obvious pressure they must be feeling, the most unsettling development was the speed with which the humans adapted their technology. Within hours of the fleet's arrival, human engineers were modifying their weapon systems and communication networks. Scientists were working around the clock to analyze the Vorthic ships, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. "They are studying us," Zekthar realized with growing alarm. "They are learning from us even as we threaten them." The communication channels filled with human voices as military commanders coordinated their response. Zekthar listened to their discussions with professional interest, noting the calm efficiency with which they planned their defense. These were not the panicked words of a defeated species. Colonel Jake Mitchell's voice came through clearly as he organized the defense of a major military installation. "Remember, people, we are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for every human who will ever live. Make them pay for every inch." Captain Lisa Grant responded from her position. "At a lunar research station." "Copy that, Colonel. Luna Station is ready to engage. We might not have their weapons, but we have something they do not understand." "What is that, Captain?" Mitchell asked. "We have everything to lose and nothing to gain from surrender. That makes us dangerous in ways they cannot comprehend." Zekthar felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. The humans were not just refusing to surrender. They were embracing the fight with an enthusiasm that defied all logic. They knew they were outmatched, but they were preparing to fight anyway, as the 72-hour deadline approached. The human response became even more coordinated and determined. Military units that had never worked together before were forming joint operations. Scientists from different nations were sharing research freely. Even civilian populations were contributing to the war effort with a unity that seemed impossible for such a divided species. The final message from Earth came not from President Carter, but from a simple human soldier standing guard at a remote outpost. "We are ready," he said simply. "Come and take it." Zekthar realized with growing horror that the intelligence reports had been completely wrong. The humans were not weak or divided. They were something far more dangerous. A species that became stronger when faced with extinction. The attack on Luna Station was supposed to be a simple demonstration of Vorthak power. War Commander Thurok led 12 assault cruisers against what intelligence described as a minor research facility orbiting Earth's moon. The mission briefing had been clear: destroy the station quickly and efficiently to show the humans the futility of resistance. Zekthar watched from the command deck as the assault fleet approached the small outpost. Luna Station looked pathetic compared to the massive Vorthak warships surrounding it. The human facility consisted of a few connected modules and a handful of docking bays. Its defensive systems appeared minimal, with only a dozen outdated fighter craft and some basic weapon platforms. "This will be over in minutes," Thurok announced confidently. "The humans will see their precious station destroyed and finally understand." The power they face. The station's commander was a human female named Captain Lisa Grant. Intelligence reports described her as a career military officer with extensive combat experience, though all of it had been against other humans. She had never faced an enemy with plasma weapons, energy shields, or advanced targeting systems. As the Vorthak fleet closed to attack range, Grant's voice crackled over the communication channels. Luna Station to all Earth forces. We are engaging. The enemy. Tell everyone we made them bleed. The first wave of Vorthak fighters swept toward the station, their plasma cannons charging for the killing strike. Zekthar expected to see the human defenses crumble immediately. Instead, something impossible happened. The human fighters did not engage in direct combat as expected. Instead, they used the debris field around the station as cover, darting between chunks of metal and ice like insects avoiding a swatter. Their primitive kinetic weapons should have been useless against Vorthak shields, but they aimed for weak points with surgical precision. How are they targeting our vulnerable systems? Sensor operator Vex asked in confusion. They should not know about the shield generators. Zekthar studied the tactical display with growing alarm. The humans were not fighting like they had been trained to fight other humans. They were adapting their tactics in real time, learning from each engagement and sharing information instantly across their entire force. One human fighter, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Ryan Scott, managed to slip through the Vorthak formation and deliver a direct hit to a cruiser's engine compartment. The explosion sent the massive ship spinning out of control, its crew scrambling to regain stability. Impossible, Thurok snarled. Their weapons cannot penetrate our armor. But the humans were not trying to penetrate armor. They were targeting joints, connections, and sensor arrays. They were using their knowledge of engineering and physics to find weaknesses that Vorthak arrogance had never considered. The battle stretched on for hours instead of minutes. Every time the Vorthak forces seemed to gain an advantage, the humans found a new way to fight back. When their fighters were destroyed, they used the station's defensive platforms. When those were eliminated, they turned the station itself into a weapon. Captain Grant's tactical genius became evident as the fight continued. She had positioned supply containers and debris in patterns that channeled the Vorthak attacks into kill zones. Her fighters worked in perfect coordination, each pilot trusting the others completely, even as they faced impossible odds. They fight like a single organism, Zekthar observed with professional respect. Each unit supports the others without question. The most disturbing moment came when Lieutenant Scott's fighter was badly damaged by plasma fire. Instead of retreating or ejecting, he aimed his crippled craft directly at the bridge of Thurok's command ship. The collision destroyed both vessels in a massive explosion that lit up the lunar sky. He chose to die rather than surrender, Zekthar whispered in shock. What kind of species does that? The answer came from Captain Grant herself. When her fighter was finally disabled by concentrated fire, she could have activated her escape pod and survived as a prisoner. Instead, she followed Scott's example and rammed her damaged craft into the shield generator of a Vorthak cruiser. Her final transmission reached every human receiver in the solar system. Earth remembers, was all she said, but those two words carried more weight than any battle cry Zekthar had ever heard. The station was destroyed, but the cost to the Vorthak fleet was devastating. 3 cruisers were gone, hundreds of elite warriors were dead, and the surviving ships were badly damaged. What should have been a quick victory had become a grinding battle of attrition. More importantly, the humans had learned from the encounter. Every tactical decision, every weapon effectiveness report, every weakness exploited was being transmitted back to Earth. The next battle would be even harder because the humans would be better prepared. War. Commander Thurok survived the battle, but his confidence was shattered. They do not fight for territory or resources, he reported to Admiral Korthax. They fight for something else entirely. Zekthar understood what that something else was. The humans were fighting for each other. Every sacrifice made the others fight harder. Every death gave the survivors more reason to resist. They were not just defending a planet. They were defending the idea that some things were worth dying for, The intelligence reports had been wrong about everything. The humans were not weak or divided. They were something far more dangerous, a species that became stronger through shared sacrifice. They had turned their greatest weakness, their attachment to each other, into their greatest strength. As the battered Vorthic fleet regrouped for the next phase of the invasion, Zekthar realized that this would not be the easy conquest they had expected. The humans had drawn first blood, and they had made it clear that every victory would come at a terrible price. Luna Station was gone, but its destruction had taught the galaxy something important about humanity. They could be killed, but they could not be broken. And that realization would haunt every Vorthic warrior who survived the battle to come. The siege of New Geneva began 3 months after the disaster at Luna Station. General Zekthar had chosen the city specifically because intelligence reports described it as a center of human science and learning. The plan was simple: capture the scientists and intellectuals, then broadcast their surrender to break human morale across the planet. Zekthar descended with the first wave of ground forces, his plasma rifle ready for what should have been a routine urban assault. The city spread below them like a maze of concrete and steel, its streets filled with the vehicles and infrastructure of a supposedly primitive civilization. Colonel Jake Mitchell commanded the hastily assembled defense force. Intelligence suggested he was a career soldier with limited combat experience, leading a mix of regular troops and civilian volunteers. The humans had been given 3 weeks to prepare their defenses, which seemed laughably inadequate against the Vorthak war machine. The first indication that something was wrong came when the Vorthak dropships approached the landing zones, anti-aircraft. Fire erupted from positions that should not have existed. The humans had somehow moved heavy weapons into the city, and concealed them so effectively that orbital surveillance had missed them completely. They turned the entire city into a fortress, reported squad leader Vorthak as his unit took cover behind a destroyed transport. Every building has firing positions. Every street is a kill zone. Zekthar advanced with his squad through what the humans called the University District. The buildings here were supposed to contain laboratories and classrooms, not military installations. Instead, they found themselves moving through a carefully constructed maze of obstacles and ambush points. The humans had used the preparation timed brilliantly. Every window was reinforced with steel plates that left just enough space for rifle barrels. Every doorway was blocked except for narrow passages that channeled attackers into crossfire positions. The streets were littered with debris that provided cover for defenders while slowing the advance of Vorthak forces. What disturbed Zekthar most was the humans' refusal to abandon their wounded. In Vorthak culture, injured warriors were expected to die with honor rather than slow down their comrades. But these humans risked everything to save their fallen. Sergeant Amy Roberts was a human medic who repeatedly ventured into enemy fire to retrieve wounded soldiers. Zekthar watched through his scope as she crawled across open ground under plasma fire, dragging an injured man to safety. Any rational being would have left the wounded soldier and preserved their own life, but Roberts kept going back. She has retrieved 17 wounded humans, reported Sniper Kex with professional admiration. She should have been killed a dozen times over. The medic's actions had a strange effect on the human defenders. Instead of becoming demoralized by their casualties, they seemed to fight harder. Every soldier Roberts saved became a symbol of hope that inspired others to take greater risks. The siege dragged on for weeks as the humans adapted to every Vorthak tactic. When plasma weapons proved effective against their barricades, they developed new types of cover using materials that absorbed or deflected energy. When Vorthak forces flanked their positions, they created new defensive lines with impossible speed. Dr. Helen Parks was a civilian scientist who had been trapped in the city when the siege began. Instead of hiding in a shelter, she worked with the military to turn everyday items into weapons. Her laboratory became a factory for improvised explosives and defensive systems. They are reverse engineering our technology, Zekthar reported to his superiors. Every weapon they capture is studied and copied. Every tactic we use is analyzed and countered. The humans learned faster than the Vorthek could adapt. They studied captured plasma rifles and developed crude but effective copies. They analyzed Vorthek armor and created ammunition specifically designed to penetrate it. Most importantly, they shared every discovery instantly across their entire force. The breakthrough came when human engineers managed to disable a Vorthek combat drone and reprogram it to work for them. Within hours, they had dozens of the devices patrolling their defensive lines. The sight of their own technology being used against them was deeply disturbing to the Vorthek forces. Colonel Mitchell's tactical genius became evident as the siege progressed. He had divided the city into overlapping defensive zones, each one designed to fall back to the next while inflicting maximum casualties on the attackers. When one position became untenable, the defenders would retreat through prepared routes to new positions. The most unsettling aspect of the human defense was their civilian involvement. Old men and women who should have been evacuating instead carried ammunition and supplies to the front lines. Children helped maintain communication networks and served as messengers between isolated units. They are not just defending a city, Zekthar realized with growing horror. They are defending their way of life. Everyone is a warrior because everyone has something to lose. The siege reached its climax when General Zekthar ordered a final assault on the city center. The remaining Vorthek forces, exhausted and demoralized, pushed forward into the heart of human resistance. But the humans had prepared one final surprise. The entire downtown area had been rigged with explosives. As the Vorthek forces advanced, the humans detonated their own city rather than allow it to fall. The explosion killed hundreds of Vorthek warriors and wounded thousands more, but it also destroyed the human defensive positions. In the aftermath, both sides lay in ruins. The humans had lost their city, but they had proven something important. They could not be broken by conventional warfare. Every victory against them came at a price so high that it felt like defeat. As Zekthar helped evacuate the wounded from the rubble, he realized that the war had changed him. He had seen courage that defied logic and sacrifice that served no strategic purpose except to prove that some things were worth dying for. The humans had lost New Geneva, but they had won something more valuable, the knowledge that they could make any victory too expensive to achieve, and that knowledge would spread to every human settlement on Earth. The Battle of Detroit Naval Yards became the moment when everything changed forever. Admiral Martinez commanded what remained of the human fleet, a collection of ships that by all rights should have been scrapped decades ago. The Vorthek fleet outnumbered them 5-1, with weapons that could destroy entire cities and shields that could deflect nuclear weapons. Zekthar stood on the bridge of the command ship, watching the human vessels approach through the tactical display. Their ships looked ancient compared to the sleek Vorthek cruisers. The paint was chipped, the hulls were patched with welded plates, and their weapon systems were clearly outdated. Yet something about their formation made him uneasy. Lieutenant Commander Steve Davis led the human squadron aboard a destroyer called the USS Defiance. Intelligence reports described him as a brilliant tactician, but his ship was so old that it should have been in a museum. The vessel had been built for fighting other humans, not for facing plasma cannons and particle beams. They cannot possibly believe they can win, Admiral Korthak said as he studied the approaching human fleet. Their weapons are primitive and their armor is laughable. This will be a massacre. But Davis had no intention of fighting a conventional battle. As the two fleets closed to combat range, the human ships suddenly scattered in all directions. Instead of forming a battle line, they spread out across the solar system like seeds carried by the wind. The Vorthek fleet tried to pursue, but the human ships were faster and more maneuverable than expected. They had been modified extensively, with their cargo holds converted to house additional engines and fuel tanks. Every unnecessary system had been removed to maximize speed and agility. "They are running," declared Weapons Officer Thurek with satisfaction. "They finally understand they cannot face us in open combat." Zekthar was not so sure. The human ships were not fleeing randomly. They were positioning themselves with careful precision. Davis was executing some kind of complex maneuver that would take time to complete. The question was whether the Vorthek fleet would give him that time. The answer came when the human ships suddenly reversed course and attacked from 12 different directions simultaneously. They used the solar system's gravity wells and asteroid fields to accelerate their vessels beyond normal limits. Their approach vectors were calculated to minimize their exposure to Vorthak weapons while maximizing their own firing opportunities. Each human ship targeted a different Vorthak vessel, but their attacks were perfectly coordinated. They struck weak points that had been identified during months of observation and analysis. Weapon systems, shield generators, and engine compartments exploded under the precisely aimed fire. How do they know our vulnerabilities? Korthax demanded as his flagship shuddered under human fire. These weaknesses are classified information. The humans had learned by watching. Every battle, every engagement, every tactical decision had been studied and analyzed. They had identified patterns in Vorthak behavior and found ways to exploit them. Most importantly, they had shared this knowledge across their entire fleet. Captain Maria Santos commanded the destroyer USS Defiance after Davis was killed in the opening exchange. Her ship was badly damaged, with half the crew dead and the engines failing. By any military standard, she should have surrendered or retreated. Instead, she did something that would haunt Zekthar for the rest of his life. All ships, this is Santos, her voice crackled over the communication channels. We are going to ram the command carrier. Do not let our sacrifice be wasted. The Defiance turned toward the massive Vorthak flagship, its damaged engines straining to build up speed. Plasma fire concentrated on the approaching destroyer, but Santos kept her ship on course. The hull plates glowed red-hot from the energy weapons, and sections of the vessel were torn away by the bombardment. She cannot possibly survive long enough to reach us, Korthax said with confidence. The ship will be destroyed before it can cause any damage. But Santos was not trying to survive. She was trying to inspire her fellow humans. The sight of the Defiance pressing forward despite impossible odds galvanized the entire human fleet. Ships that had been retreating turned back to fight. Damaged vessels that should have withdrawn pressed their attacks. The destroyer reached the Vorthak command ship and detonated its remaining ammunition in a massive explosion. The blast tore through the carrier's hull, destroying its main weapon systems and killing thousands of crew members. The flagship began to list as emergency systems struggled to contain the damage. Santa's sacrifice was broadcast across the human fleet, but instead of mourning their loss, the humans celebrated her. Courage. Her final words became a battle cry that echoed through every human ship, for Earth and for each other. The battle turned in that moment. The Vorthak fleet, demoralized by the destruction of their flagship, began to withdraw. The human ships, inspired by Santa's example, pursued them with renewed fury. What should have been a Vorthak victory became a rout. Zekthar watched the retreat with growing horror. The humans had not just defeated them, they had broken something fundamental about Vorthak superiority. They had proven that courage and sacrifice could overcome superior technology and numbers. The most disturbing part was how the humans treated their dead. Instead of viewing casualties as acceptable losses, they mourned each death while using it to fuel their determination. Santos became a symbol of human resistance, her name spoken with reverence by every surviving crew member. As the battered Vorthak fleet limped back to their staging area, Zekthar realized that the war was already lost. The humans had found a way to turn their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. They fought not for conquest or glory, but for love of each other and their home. The intelligence reports had been wrong about everything. The humans were not primitive or weak. They were something far more dangerous, a species that became stronger when faced with extinction. They had turned warfare into an act of love, and that made them unbeatable. The war ended not with human surrender, but with the sound of Vorthak ships retreating into hyperspace. Zekthar stood in the observation deck of the command vessel, watching Earth shrink in the distance as the battered fleet limped back to home. Space. The blue and green planet looked peaceful from this distance, giving no sign of the terrible battles that had raged across its surface. Admiral Corthax would file his report describing the withdrawal as a strategic repositioning to allow for better resource allocation. The official records would claim that Earth was deemed unsuitable for immediate colonization due to environmental factors. But every warrior who had fought in the human system knew the truth. They had been beaten by a species they had thought was inferior. The journey home took weeks, but Zekthar barely noticed the passage of time. He spent his days staring out at the stars, trying to process what he had witnessed. The humans had not just defeated them, they had fundamentally changed. His understanding of what it meant to be a warrior, sleep became impossible. Every time Zekthar closed his eyes, he saw Captain Lisa Grant's final charge at Luna Station. He remembered her voice saying, "Earth remembers," as she rammed her fighter into the Vorthic cruiser. The image played in his mind over and over, a loop of courage and sacrifice that he could not escape, but the nightmares were not just about the battles. They were about the quiet moments between the fighting. He remembered the human medic, Sergeant Amy Roberts, who had treated wounded Vorthic prisoners with the same care she gave her own soldiers. She had bandaged their wounds and given them water, even though they were her enemies. "Why did you help us?" Zekthar had asked her during a brief ceasefire. "Because you were hurt," she had replied simply. That is enough. The concept had been completely foreign to him then. Vorthic warriors showed mercy only to those who had earned it through combat. Enemies were to be destroyed, not healed. But Roberts had acted with a compassion that transcended military logic. Even more haunting was the memory of Dr. Helen Parks, the civilian scientist who had been trapped in New Geneva during the siege. She had been captured during the final assault, her laboratory destroyed and her research scattered. Instead of begging for mercy or trying to escape, she had spent her time in captivity trying to understand the Vorthic language and culture. "You fight because you have to," she had told Zekthar during one of their conversations. "We fight because we choose to. That is the difference between us." Her words had seemed meaningless at the time, but now they echoed in his mind with terrible clarity. The humans had not been forced to resist. They had chosen to resist. They had looked at overwhelming odds and decided that some things were worth dying for. When the fleet finally reached Vorthac space, Zekthar requested transfer to rear echelon duties. He told his superiors that he was suffering from combat fatigue, which was partially true. But the real reason was that he could no longer bring himself to fight. The humans had shown him something that made violence seem pointless. His new assignment was overseeing supply logistics for the Fourth Fleet, a peaceful job that kept him far from any active combat zones. His fellow warriors assumed he had been broken by the intensity of the fighting, and he allowed them to believe it. The truth was far more complicated. The Empire moved on to other conquests, other worlds that offered easier victories. The official military histories barely mentioned the human campaign, classifying it as a minor setback rather than a decisive defeat. But Zekthar knew better. The humans had won something far more important than a single battle. Months passed, but the memories remained as vivid as ever. He saw Captain Maria Santos piloting her damaged destroyer toward the Vorthac flagship, her final words echoing across the communication channels, "For Earth and for each other." He remembered the explosion that had torn through the command carrier, and the way the human fleet had responded to her sacrifice. The most disturbing realization was that the humans had not defeated the Vorthac through superior technology or numbers. They had won because they fought for something greater than themselves. They fought for love, for hope, for the simple right to exist as free beings. The Vorthac had fought for conquest and glory, abstract concepts that meant nothing when faced with real suffering. The humans had fought for each other, for their families, for their home. Their weapons might have been primitive, but their motivation was pure. Other veterans of the human campaign began to show similar symptoms. Some requested transfers to non-combat positions. Others simply left the military entirely, claiming they had lost their taste for warfare. The High Command dismissed these cases as individual weaknesses, but Zekthar recognized them as signs of a deeper problem. The humans had done something that no other species had ever accomplished. They had made the Vorthic Empire question the value of conquest itself. They had shown that there were things worth protecting that could not be taken by force. As he prepared for another sleepless night, Zekthar realized that the war had changed him forever. He had seen what it meant to be truly human, and it was both the most terrifying and most beautiful thing in the galaxy. The humans had lost thousands of soldiers and civilians in the fighting. Their cities had been damaged and their fleets destroyed. But they had won something that could never be taken from them, the knowledge that they had faced extinction. With courage and dignity, the war was over, but for those who had witnessed humanity's terrible beauty in battle, the sleepless nights would never end. They had learned that true strength came not from weapons or armor, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything for those you loved. In the end, that was why he could not sleep. The humans had shown him what he had been missing his entire life, the ability to fight for something greater than himself.